Hi, everybody. It's Vicki Lee. We're here to do a series on domestic abuse and domestic violence and all the different layers of what it includes. Unfortunately, in man's history, with the sin curse and a fallen world, this has been a matter of reality throughout the history of mankind since the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. We deal with this in the church. We deal with this outside the church. So I'm going to bring some different segments to you. This particular segment is an audiovisual. I hope you enjoy it. At the end of each presentation, there's going to be a song that I wrote and did an audiovisual to as well, entitled Give Me Life. This is not a Christian song. This is a song that God gave to me to write, and it talks about in the world and how people deal with violence. I want to say that violence, domestic violence, the victims can be women or they can be men. Men have a 10% chance of being victims of domestic abuse or domestic violence. This is for everybody. But here we go. We're going to feature the legislative fields and law enforcement fields right now, as well as a look back historically. Then the song at the end. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy. Domestic abuse and violence, legal and law enforcement fields. Among the greatest ongoing concerns for law enforcement are domestic abuse and domestic violence calls. The potential for escalation and violence erupting are very high. Officers are sent into terrain they do not know. How many people are in the location? What is the layout of the house? Are alcohol and or drugs involved? Is there a history of mental illness? Is anyone armed? Has the perpetrator damaged or are they damaging property? Assaults are more likely when the batterer is unemployed, intoxicated, resides with the domestic violence victim, has just damaged property, and has a hostile demeanor. When alcohol is involved and a weapon is on the scene, the propensity for escalation and injury or death to anyone on the scene is a heightened possibility. Officers died in New York. They didn't get control of the scene. They were set up by different perpetrators in different parts of the house. Two officers died, another severely wounded. They were greeted at the door and violence erupted. It has been said as a law enforcement officer, you are 100% on the defense. Others are on the offense. From 1980 to 2006, 113,236 law enforcement officers were assaulted. 160 died. 8.5% of law enforcement officers' deaths are due to responding to domestic disturbances. I spoke with one such law enforcement officer who is part of the above statistic, having been assaulted while on a domestic call. The wife called to report a domestic disturbance. While handcuffing the perpetrator, the wife herself took a baseball bat and hit the officer, breaking his rib. The wife was then arrested. The husband was telling the officers to take him, but leave her alone. This injured officer informed me that many of the calls are the same people cycling repeatedly. The cries for help are only for the moment. Once the partner realizes they are incarcerating the perpetrator, they realize they are economically dependent upon the perpetrator and the cold reality of the financials set in. This officer went on to explain that without intervention, somewhere the cycle may go on indefinitely, never really being broken. When a call comes in, officers can pull up the address and you can see the long list of calls that have gone on over time. It's a repeat cycle. Even separation and one person deciding to break the cycle does not necessitate a permanent break. Prison sentences for domestic violence can perhaps break the cycle, with the partner being forced to become independent of the cycle itself. Some sort of intervention is needed. Legislation regarding domestic abuse and violence. 1994 was a watershed year when Congress passed the Violence Against Women Act. Domestic violence became a national crime. This federal legislation was enacted to help overburden state and local criminal justice systems. Those state and localities still carried the burden of manpower and enforcement, but the federal laws strengthened their positioning. In 1994, 1996, and 2005, changes to the Gun Control Act made it a crime for those convicted of domestic violence to possess guns. April 2019 legislation passed banning convicted individuals from purchasing firearms. The Violence Against Women Act has a shelf life. It was reauthorized in 2000, 2005, and 2013. The most recent signing of the bill was the authorization March 15, 2022 by President Joe Biden. Interestingly enough, female gender mutilation is being introduced for legislation. According to the Centers for Disease Control Prevention, 513,000 women in the United States have either experienced this mutilation or are at high risk. Police officers carry legal liability for inadequate response to domestic abuse calls. Perhaps violence has not occurred. If the officer feels there is violence, a threat of violence, or the potential for violence, arrests can be made. Should the officer fail to protect the situation adequately, the officer is liable. I was told when this law passed, arrests were being made and jails were filling up quickly. Those arrested were sleeping on floors, yet the legal and judicial system has held their ground. They realized the danger involved. Domestic violence charges are classified along with rape, murder, sexual assault, and battery with intent to do bodily harm. You will not be released until you see a judge. In years past, judges were available Monday through Friday. There are no set guidelines for bond. The judge reviews the history of the arrested and takes mitigating circumstances into consideration. The judge can revoke bond in totality. A very telling trend happened in the early 2000s. The state's attorney's offices issued a directive. They wanted police officers to identify the primary aggressor in domestic calls. Even though legislation was passed and titles as violence against women, in real time, officers were being asked to determine which person was the aggressor. Identify and arrest if necessary. The legal and judicial system was determining that the aggressor might be female. In fact, if you are female, you have a 25% chance of being abused. For men, it's a 10% chance statistically of being abused. Women are abusers as well as men. Marcys Law. Marcely Ann Nicholas, known as Marcy, was stalked and killed by her boyfriend in 1983. She was a University of California, Santa Barbara student. Her family was returning from her funeral 1 week later. They stopped to get a loaf of bread. Her mother was confronted by Marcy's murderer in that store. He had been released on bail mere days after the murder, and the family was never notified. Marcy's Law was voted into law by California citizens by a 54% margin in 2008 as Proposition 9, the California Victims' Bill of Rights. This law gives rights to protect and inform victims of domestic violence. Marcy's Law has been approved by voters in Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Nevada, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. Efforts in Idaho, Iowa, Maine, Missouri, New Hampshire, and Tennessee are underway. Domestic violence isn't a new issue. How a case was handled 70 years ago. Glenville, Georgia was not a quiet, peaceful town. At least it wasn't when one man in this town drank and beat his wife. The 14-year-old son intervened this time. He witnessed it too many times. He was not going to hear his mother cry in pain anymore. He stepped in to protect his mother. He beat his father. His mother took a frying pan and helped him beat his father. It was a watershed moment. When the father woke up from his drunken binge, he was informed things were changing. The wife was a nurse. She had made arrangements to move to Florida and live with family. Her husband was not welcomed to come live with her. The wife and son moved to Sarasota, Florida. He would enter high school there. Family was a godsend in taking them in. 2 years later, the husband asked to be welcomed back. He had lost his wife and son. He missed them. Drunkenness was not worth the loss. He sobered up. He was reunited with his family. He never drank again. He would not keep company with anyone who would. The son grew into a man with a wife and 2 sons of his own. He informed his sons that alcohol was to be consumed with caution. Domestic abuse or violence was to never be part of the family dynamic. 70 years later, there is no continuation of domestic abuse or violence due to alcohol abuse or in any circumstance. The curse has been broken. Help for victims. If you are a victim of domestic abuse or violence, here is a list of numbers to call for help. Locally, call 911. Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE. National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1-303-839-1852. National Center for Victims of Crime, 1-800-FYICALL or www.nevc.org. National Organization Victim Assistance, www.trinova.org or 1-800-TRI-NOVA. In crisis, 1-800-33-HAVEN. 24 hours a day. All calls are confidential.
Don't want no icky, icky man at my window. No icky, icky man in my bed. No tall, dark charmer playing games with my head. He can keep all his money. You can have a fortune and fame. Take those hollow places. To me it's all the same. Give me life, give me room to breathe. Take my chances on the street. Give me life, the wind in my hair. Shed all my worries on a wing and a prayer. Let the winds of change, let them blow. The wind in my hair. Let me go, 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 let me go. Don't want no icky, icky man in my window. No icky, icky man in my bed. No tall, dark charmer playing games with my head. Give me life, give me room to breathe. Take my chances on the streets. Just give me life, the wind in my hair, shed all my worries.